In the dead of winter 1834, a chilling mystery unfolded behind the quiet brick walls of the Sacred Heart Convent in rural Ohio. Within just 48 hours, 12 nuns, healthy, devout women, were found dead in their beds. Not a single one showed signs of illness, injury, or distress. The youngest was 23, the eldest 47. Each was discovered lying peacefully, hands folded in prayer, as if they had chosen to slip silently from this world in a final act of grace. Local physician Dr. Samuel Hartwell examined the bodies. He was baffled. No poison, no wounds, no infection, no disease. His official report stated something no doctor ever wants to write. They were, by all accounts, perfectly healthy at the time of death. For nearly 200 years, the Catholic Church kept the true story of Sacred Heart buried deep within its archives, locked away, unspoken, hidden behind layers of silence and secrecy. But now, newly uncovered letters and testimonies from that bleak winter suggest a truth far more disturbing than any ghost story or demonic tale ever told. Before we go further into this story, a warning. This channel is not for everyone. Sleepy History Tales is for those brave enough to peer into the darkest corners of the past. If you're still here, I'm guessing you're not easily frightened. So subscribe now and drop a comment to tell me what city or state you're listening from. Because the story you're about to hear is one most people wouldn't dare to repeat aloud. Very few channels explore the past the way we do. And if you've made it this far, then you're clearly not like most people. Now let's uncover the secret that drove 12 strong, faithful women to their deaths in just 2 days of an unforgiving winter. The truth lay dormant for generations, but secrets, especially those written in the trembling hand of a survivor, have a way of rising to the surface. The Sacred Heart Convent sat on 47 acres of gently rolling farmland in southeastern Ohio, about 12 miles from the small town of Millbrook. Established in 1821 by the Sisters of Mercy, the convent was created to serve the growing Catholic immigrant population, primarily German and Irish, who settled in the area after the completion of the Ohio and Erie Canal. The 2-story brick structure with its iron crosses and proud bell tower stood as a symbol of faith in a region where Protestant suspicion of Catholics often ran high and occasionally turned hostile. Since 1828, the convent had been overseen by Mother Superior Catherine Brennan, a strong yet compassionate leader who guided the 17 sisters that called Sacred Heart home. The nuns lived quietly, supporting themselves through farming, teaching at a small school for local Catholic children, and selling intricate needlework to families in Millbrook and nearby farms. By all accounts, the sisters lived peacefully and devoutly, causing no trouble and asking for none in return. The winter of 1834 was particularly severe. Snow had been falling steadily since November, and by January, the drifts had piled nearly to the first-floor windows. But the sisters were well prepared. The root cellar was packed with preserved vegetables, the pantry stocked with grain, and the woodshed filled with split oak and maple. They had survived harsh winters before, and at first, this one felt no different. Sister Mary Agnes, 26 years old and originally from County Cork, Ireland, served as the convent's recorder. Her job was to keep careful logs of daily life weather patterns and the spiritual progress of the community. Her writings, discovered in 1923 inside a sealed wooden box hidden beneath the convent's floorboards, remain the only first-hand account of the final days at Sacred Heart. At first, her handwriting is meticulous, neat, and orderly. But as the entries progress, the script grows shaky, erratic. Words are crossed out. Ink is smeared. Some pages appear to be stained with tears. Among the nuns, a few stood out for their particular devotion and roles within the community. Sister Mary Catherine, the youngest at 23, had joined the convent just 2 years earlier after losing her entire family to a cholera outbreak in Cincinnati. Her angelic voice often echoed through the halls during evening prayers. Then there was Sister Mary Elizabeth, aged 34, the convent's herbalist and healer. She had learned the medicinal properties of plants from her grandmother back in Bavaria and tended to the sisters' health with care and precision. Sister Mary Margaret, aged 41, served as the convent's treasurer, a role she fulfilled with a quiet brilliance. Her sharp financial instincts had guided the sisters through the economic hardships of the early 1830s. Thanks to her careful management, Sacred Heart endured while many similar institutions struggled or closed. The daily life at the convent was governed by a strict adherence to the canonical hours. The sisters rose at 4:00 a.m. for matins and prime, followed by Mass at sunrise. Their morning meal was simple porridge and bread shared in silence. Then they scattered to their duties, teaching, tending the garden, preparing meals, sewing, scrubbing floors, and offering prayers at appointed hours throughout the day. Dinner was taken promptly at noon, and afterward came more work and quiet study. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Vespers filled the halls with sacred hymns. Compline began at 8:00 p.m., ushering in the great silence that would last until the morning bells. The structure of Sacred Heart was as humble and disciplined as the lives it sheltered. On the first floor, the chapel, the refectory where meals were taken, the kitchen, and the Mother Superior's office. The second floor housed dormitory-style sleeping quarters, Spartan rooms furnished only with a narrow bed, a crucifix above the pillow, and a simple basin for washing. In the basement, the root cellar stored provisions. The laundry area bustled with work, and a small library, heavy with dust and candle wax, provided a space for studying scripture and writing correspondence. But what truly set Sacred Heart apart was its isolation. The nearest neighbor lived 3 miles away, and during Ohio's brutal winters, the road to Millbrook vanished beneath deep snow. For the sisters, this remoteness had always felt like a gift separation from the world, an opportunity to dedicate themselves wholly to God. But that same seclusion would soon become a haunting factor in the nightmare that followed. The first warning sign arrived quietly on the morning of January 15th, 1834. Sister Mary Agnes noted in her daily journal that Sister Mary Catherine, so faithful, so devout, had failed to appear for matins. It was unheard of. The young nun was known for her discipline and never missed a service. Concerned Mother Superior Brennan went to check on her. She found her lying still in bed, her hands wrapped around her rosary, her face calm and faintly smiling as if in serene prayer. It was a peaceful image. Too peaceful. Word was sent to Millbrook, and despite the snow-packed roads, Dr. Samuel Hartwell made the arduous trip on horseback to examine the body. A Protestant and a man deeply skeptical of Catholic customs, Hartwell nevertheless treated his duties with professionalism and solemnity. His clinical report, still preserved in the Millbrook Township archives, remains as chilling as it is precise. The deceased shows no signs of physical trauma, no trace of poison or illness. Her complexion is healthy, limbs flexible, eyes clear. I find no cause of death detectable through examination. But what haunted Dr. Hartwell was not what he found, but rather what he didn't. By all appearances, Sister Mary Catherine was the picture of perfect health. Her heart had been strong, her lungs clear, her blood free of infection. She had, it seemed, simply stopped. When questioned, the other sisters could offer no explanation, only that in the days before her death, Sister Mary Catherine had appeared more radiant than usual. She had spent longer hours in the chapel, spoke often of feeling blessed and chosen, and carried a gentle stillness in her demeanor, as if listening to music no one else could hear. Her funeral was held 2 days later on January 17th, under a sky thick with snow. Father Timothy O'Brien, the traveling priest who visited Sacred Heart monthly, was summoned from his parish in Lancaster to perform the last rites. By the time he arrived, the convent's graveyard was cloaked in white. Only the wrought iron crosses marking the older graves stood above the frozen drifts, like skeletal sentinels watching over the land. Sister Mary Agnes wrote that the funeral proceeded as expected. The sisters sang solemn hymns. Prayers were whispered into the wind. The ritual was carried out without interruption. But she added a detail that would later take on ominous weight. Several of the sisters remarked how peaceful Sister Mary Catherine looked in death, how her expression seemed to glow with a quiet joy. One nun said she had never seen such peace on a human face. Sister Mary Elizabeth whispered that she almost envied her the calm she had found. And Sister Mary Margaret, the practical-minded treasurer, admitted she had been having strange dreams of late dreams in which angels called to her, softly beckoning her home. The morning of January 18th, another silence fell over Sacred Heart, a deeper, colder one. Sister Mary Elizabeth did not appear for matins. Mother Superior Brennan, her concern now tipping into fear, climbed the stairs with heavy steps. She found the herbalist lying exactly as Sister Mary Catherine had been discovered. Hands folded, neatly rosary clutched to her chest, a serene smile lingering on her face. The stillness in the room was unnerving. The air itself felt wrong, charged with something unseen. A creeping dread settled into the Mother Superior's chest. This was no illness, no accident. Something unnatural, something terrifying had entered their convent. Once again, Dr. Samuel Hartwell braved the storm, forcing his horse through snowdrifts now chest deep. His second examination yielded the same result as the first: no signs of trauma, no poison, no disease. Mary Elizabeth's stash of medicinal herbs was carefully inspected. Nothing toxic, nothing suspicious, nothing at all. His frustration was plain in the notes he left behind. I am confounded. These women appear to simply stop, as if death came not for them, but from within them, as if they chose it. That evening, the remaining sisters gathered in the chapel for an emergency prayer session. The candles flickered violently as Mother Superior Brennan led the rosary. But the words, so familiar, so comforting, now felt foreign, cold, hollow. Sister Mary Agnes wrote in her journal, "Something lingers in the air. Something you can't name but feel all the same. It prickles the skin and silences the breath. The sisters sense it too. None speak of it, but all feel it. We pray harder, but the echoes come back empty. God feels far." The deaths of Sisters Mary Catherine and Mary Elizabeth send waves of unease rippling through the isolated convent. In response, Mother Superior Brennan imposed additional prayer sessions, increased fasting, and encouraged deep reflection. She believed God was testing their faith, and the only response was greater devotion. The remaining 15 sisters obeyed, throwing themselves into prayer with fervent intensity. But Sister Mary Agnes observed something far more troubling. The sisters speak more of death than life, she recorded. They envy the peace of the departed. Some long for that release. Sister Mary Margaret spends hours at the window, now staring at the snow-covered cemetery. When I asked her what she sees, she smiled and whispered, "Home, where once Sacred Heart's isolation had felt sacred, now it was suffocating." With the roads buried under snow and no way to send for help, the sisters were trapped with their prayers, their fears, and the growing presence of death. Dr. Hartwell managed to return to Millbrook just before another heavy snowfall sealed them in. His final words to Mother Superior Brennan were later preserved in a letter he wrote to his brother. "In all my years of medicine, I've never encountered anything like this. These women are not dying from anything I can name. And yet, they die." Back at the convent, the daily rituals continued. But something had changed. The sisters still rose at 4 a.m., still prayed, still worked. But it was all a blur, as if they were performing sacred duties while asleep. Their voices during matins were distant, their steps listless. They moved like shadows of themselves, thin and flickering, and worse, death was no longer feared. It was spoken of softly, tenderly, as something beautiful. Sister Mary Agnes recorded fragments of conversations that chilled her. Sister Mary Magdalene, once the most joyful among us, told me she now sees visions while praying. She speaks of golden fields and the faces of our lost sisters beckoning to her. When I pressed her for details, she smiled and said only, "It's too beautiful to describe." Outside, the weather grew ever more brutal. The wind howled like something alive. Temperatures dropped so low that even stepping outside for moments became dangerous. The doors remained bolted shut. The windows frosted from inside. The Sisters of Sacred Heart were no longer just isolated. They were imprisoned by snow, by silence, and by something far colder than winter. The only sounds that remained were the moaning wind circling the convent walls and the occasional snap of tree limbs breaking beneath the weight of ice. Sacred Heart had fallen into a deep, uneasy silence. Mother Superior Brennan tried to maintain order, preserve the rhythm of their sacred routines. But even she was changing. The darkness seemed to touch her spirit as well. Sister Mary Agnes, ever watchful, recorded a shift in the Mother Superior's speech. She had begun speaking of God's will more often, but not as comfort, as certainty. She told me yesterday, Agnes wrote, that perhaps our sisters were not taken in tragedy, but chosen in grace, that their deaths were not endings, but transformations. When Agnes pressed her for clarification, Brennan gazed at her with distant eyes, eyes that seemed to see something beyond the room, beyond the world. Some souls, she whispered, are too pure for this life, child. Perhaps God is simply calling them home. The first sign that something more than mourning had overtaken Sacred Heart came not from within, but from a nearby farm. Elizabeth Hoffman, a German immigrant who lived on the closest homestead, had noticed something strange. The bell tower of Sacred Heart had not rung in days. Normally, the soft peal of the evening bell would carry across the snow-covered valley a quiet reminder of prayer. But for 3 nights in a row, nothing. Not a sound. Her husband Hans had tried to reach the convent to check on the sisters, but the snow was too deep. His horse refused to press on. Frustrated, he returned home chilled and uneasy. "There's no smoke," he told his wife. "Not from a single chimney. No voices. No sound. It's like the whole place is holding its breath." He had no idea how right he was. On the morning of January 21st, 4 days after Sister Mary Catherine's death, Sister Mary Margaret was found still and smiling, rosary entwined in her hands. The convent's treasurer, once known for her logic and discipline, had joined the procession of the departed. On her desk sat her ledger, neatly closed, every account balanced to the last cent. And beside it, a note in her tidy handwriting: "All earthly debts settled. The final accounting awaits." Dr. Hartwell was summoned once more, pushing through the worsening blizzard to find only 14 sisters remaining. He was visibly shaken, not only by the storm, but by what awaited him inside. The convent was no longer a place of order and calm. It had become something else. "They've changed," he wrote in his medical journal. "They appear faded, like ghosts pretending to be women. Their skin pale, their eyes distant. They whisper to unseen figures. They smile at things I cannot see." When he questioned them, their answers only deepened his unease. "We are blessed," one said. "We are being called," said another. "They are waiting for us," whispered a third. There was no grief, only anticipation. His examination of Sister Mary Margaret mirrored those that came before. No cause of death, no illness. Her skin was still warm, though she had been dead for hours. Her muscles soft and relaxed, no sign of rigor mortis. Her face held the same peaceful, almost radiant smile. It was, as he would later write, unnatural in its serenity. Meanwhile, Sister Mary Agnes continued documenting everything, though her notes had become nearly illegible. The careful script of a trained hand had devolved into a scrawl of trembling letters, blotted ink, and frantic underlining. "They no longer speak of this world," she wrote. "Their every word is of heaven, of light, of peace. They speak to me with pity now. They look at me as though I'm the one who is lost." The isolation was now complete. No word from outside, no path through the snow. Sacred Heart had become a sealed tomb, with only the wind and the dead for company. The cold had grown so intense that the water in the kitchen buckets froze solid each night. The woodpile, once full, was dwindling rapidly. The sisters were burning through it just to survive. But even survival no longer seemed to be their priority. Death had entered Sacred Heart, and the remaining sisters were no longer fighting it. They were waiting for it. By now, the sisters seemed unconcerned with the practical matters of survival. Food, firewood, shelter, none of it mattered to them. Their focus had turned completely inward, fixed on something unseen, something only they could feel. It was as if they had begun to live in another world altogether, one hidden behind the veil of snow and silence. On the evening of January 22nd, Mother Superior Brennan summoned the sisters for a special prayer session. The chapel was dimly lit, the stained glass windows rimed with frost. The remaining sisters gathered their voices, rising in solemn hymns. But there was something strange in the sound. Sister Mary Agnes wrote, "The music. It doesn't sound like them anymore. Their voices echo in a way I cannot describe, like they are coming from a place far beyond these walls. I find myself afraid to listen too closely. There's something in their song that calls to me, something that wants me to follow them wherever they are going." The next morning shattered any lingering belief that these deaths were natural. Sister Mary Magdalene, once the warmest, most joyful of the sisters who had spoken of golden visions, was found in her bed face, serene rosary entwined in her fingers. But unlike the others, she held something else, a small piece of paper. On it in careful script, a single word, "Soon." Dr. Hartwell, now visibly shaken by the mounting deaths, demanded a full examination, not just of the body, but of the entire convent. What he found beneath Sacred Heart would haunt him for the rest of his life. In the root cellar, hidden behind a false wall, was a small stone chamber. It was cold, silent, and completely out of place, a space that bore no resemblance to anything sanctioned by the Catholic Church. Inside were 13 wooden crosses, each etched with the name of a sister. 3 crosses, Mary Catherine, Mary Elizabeth, and Mary Margaret, lay flat on a stone altar. The remaining 10 stood upright in a perfect circle. At the center of this circle, one larger cross bore a name that made Hartwell's blood run cold. Mother Superior Catherine Brennan. He wrote in his journal, "This is no chapel. This is no shrine. This is a ritual space. These sisters have been preparing for their deaths, deliberately, methodically, marking their own ends as though scheduling appointments. This is not contagion. This is something organized and something terribly wrong." When he confronted Mother Superior Brennan, expecting outrage, denial, or at least confusion, he got none of it. Instead, she smiled, that same strange, peaceful smile he'd seen on the dead. "God's will," she said softly, "cannot be hidden forever, Doctor. What must be, will be." Sister Mary Agnes, now one of only 30 remaining, began to doubt everything she had once held sacred. Her journal entries grew more frantic. "I don't recognize them anymore," she wrote. "The women I have shared my life with for years, they're strangers now. They speak of death like it's a wedding feast, like they've been given invitations to a celebration I have not been asked to attend." Whenever she questioned them, they simply smiled, placing gentle hands on her shoulders as if comforting a confused child. "You'll understand soon," they whispered. Outside, the cold had turned brutal. The mercury fell to 20 below zero. Windows froze over opaque with layers of ice. Even during the day, no light filtered through. At night, the building moaned under the pressure of snow and frost, its very bones groaning in protest. The sisters retreated to the kitchen, the only room warm enough to survive in. They huddled around the fireplace, wrapped in blankets and silence. But the silence did not last long. Even in those tight, freezing quarters, the sisters kept praying, always praying. Only now, their prayers had changed. They were no longer petitions to heaven, but calls, urgent, whispered invocations, pleas sent out into the void, as if trying to reach someone just beyond the veil of reality. Someone or something close enough to hear them. They no longer whispered about death. Now they whispered about the arrival. The time is near, they said. The calling has begun, most chilling of all. The sisters had started taking turns sitting vigil by the frost-covered window facing the convent cemetery, watching, waiting for something only they could see. Dr. Hartwell, still stranded at Sacred Heart due to the impassable snow, found himself not merely a physician, but a witness, helpless and increasingly horrified. His medical training screamed for logic for diagnosis, but nothing he knew could account for what he saw with his own eyes. These women were not dying of illness or trauma. They were leaving, willingly. But how or why remained a mystery that defied all reason. On the night of January 24th, with wind battering the convent so fiercely that the walls groaned and the roof beams shuddered, Sister Mary Agnes uncovered the final terrible truth. Unable to sleep, she walked the silent corridors, candle in hand. That's when she heard voices drifting from the chapel, low, melodic, inhumanly harmonious. Cautiously, she approached. The door was slightly ajar. What she saw inside nearly stopped her heart. The remaining sisters were gathered in a tight circle around the altar. But they were not alone. Standing among them were the dead. Sister Mary Catherine, Sister Mary Elizabeth, Sister Mary Margaret. They stood upright, glowing faintly in the candlelight, their eyes alive with an otherworldly light. Their lips moved in silent prayer, echoing the words of the living. They weren't ghosts, Agnes later wrote. Too solid, too real, not faded or transparent. They were present, tangible, transformed. And then she watched in numb disbelief as the dead reached out and touched the living. Where their fingers met skin, shoulders, cheeks, hands, the living sisters' faces changed. Their expressions shifted from solemnity to joy. Not earthly joy, but something deeper, something radiant, divine, or perhaps inhuman. Agnes trembled as her pen scratched across the page. They looked blessed, but not by any god I know. Then Mother Superior Brennan stepped into the center of the circle. The three dead sisters turned toward her. They reached for her face, her hands, her chest, and as their fingers touched her heart, the Mother Superior's face broke into a rapture so intense Agnes could hardly bear to look. Soon, Brennan whispered. Her voice rang clear in the cold chapel. Soon we will all be together, free of this world's weight. The calling has come, and we must answer. The living sisters nodded, every face now alight with the same transcendent calm. They began to pray again, this time in perfect harmony with a second layer of voices. Voices that did not come from human throats. Voices that resonated from beyond. The candlelight flickered wildly. The shadows on the walls moved of their own accord, no longer mirroring the flames. Agnes turned and ran heart-pounding tears freezing on her face. She locked herself inside her cell, barricading the door with her desk and cot. Then she wrote desperately, feverishly, trying to record every detail before her memory could betray her. Her handwriting shattered across the page. Words trailed into jagged lines. Ink blotched like blood. "They are not dying," she scrawled. "They are being called. Chosen. They are not gone. They are waiting. Waiting for the others to join them. I am not chosen. I am not wanted. I am alone." By then, only 12 remained, and Sister Mary Agnes feared she was the only one who still remembered what it meant to be human. Just when you think the horror has peaked, the nightmare deepens. If this story gave you chills, share it with a friend who craves the dark and the unexplainable. Click that like button to support Sleepy History Tales, and subscribe so you never miss another descent into the unknown. Let's uncover what happens next in this tale of death, devotion, and the quiet horror that overtook Sacred Heart Convent. The morning of January 25th brought with it a silence so complete, so unnatural, that it pierced the soul. Sister Mary Agnes, still shaken by what she had witnessed in the chapel the night before, awoke in her cell to a dead stillness. No ringing of the bell, no shuffling footsteps, no hushed voices reciting morning prayers. She opened her door and stepped into a world emptied of the living. The final 12 sisters had all died in the night. Each lay in her bed, face turned slightly upward, hands folded gently over her chest. Their expressions were familiar now, serene, blissful. But this time, something was different. In each hand, along with the rosary, was a small slip of paper. Every paper bore the same word: complete. Dr. Hartwell, sleeping fitfully in Mother Superior Brennan's former office, was roused by the creak of footsteps in the chapel. He entered to find Sister Mary Agnes sitting alone in a pew. Her eyes locked on the altar. She looked as if she'd aged a decade overnight. Her face pale, her hands trembling. But her gaze held something far more disturbing. The emptiness of someone who had seen what no one should see. "They're not gone," she said in a whisper. "They're still here, standing behind you, waiting for the final sister to come home." Hartwell turned, expecting, hoping not to see anything. He saw only the still candlelit chapel. But when he looked back at Sister Agnes, her hands now held a paper of her own. He hadn't seen her pick it up. He hadn't seen it appear. It simply was. One word: soon. In his final journal entry, Dr. Hartwell recorded what may be the most terrifying moment of his life. 12 women have died, not from disease, not from poison, not from violence. They died together. not minutes apart precisely at the same time. Their expressions weren't peaceful, they were rapturous. It was as if they had glimpsed something too beautiful to endure. There is no explanation in medicine for this. No science I know can comprehend it. This was no plague. This was no hysteria. It was a ritual, a calling. Still reeling, Dr. Hartwell led Sister Agnes down to the cellar to examine the hidden chamber one last time. What they found confirmed everything. The arrangement of crosses had changed again. Now, 12 crosses, those of the newly dead, lay flat on the altar. Alongside them, at last, was the cross marked Catherine Brennan. Only one cross remained standing, the one with the name Mary Agnes. That was when Hartwell understood. It was never random, he wrote. These were not isolated events. It was a sequence, a countdown. And the ritual is not yet finished. The community of Sacred Heart was never meant to survive. It was meant to ascend together. And Sister Mary Agnes was the final key. Faced with undeniable evidence of her own fate, Agnes did not scream. She did not flee. Instead, she began to speak, not in her own voice, but in a tone that was strange, soft, and unnervingly serene. "They're calling me now," she said, eyes glazed with light. Their voices, so beautiful, so full of joy. I understand now. I am the last, the completion. I am the final link in the sacred circle. The ritual nears its end. If this story has left your skin crawling, share it with a friend who dares to explore the unknown. Click that like button to support more tales like this from Sleepy History Tales, and subscribe to be the first to hear what happens next. They say once I join them, the work will be complete, the purpose fulfilled. Those were the words Sister Mary Agnes whispered to Dr. Hartwell as the final layers of the truth began to unfold. Driven by desperation and the creeping realization that he was witnessing something far beyond the boundaries of medicine or reason, Dr. Hartwell began to tear through the convent's records. In Mother Superior Brennan's private desk, hidden beneath false bottom drawers and stacks of holy texts, he found a journal. It was not like the others. It did not chronicle prayer. It did not track the spiritual progress of the sisters. It held secrets, terrible ones. The journal detailed a long-standing correspondence between Mother Superior Brennan and a shadowy figure known only by a single title, the Shepherd. The letters, written in cipher and buried deep within the journal's pages, took Dr. Hartwell hours to decode. But when he finally unraveled the code, what he read shattered him. The deaths at Sacred Heart were not divine miracles. They were the final phase of a ritual that had been in motion for months. The shepherd had chosen Sacred Heart for a reason. He had persuaded Mother Superior Brennan that her convent had been chosen, that her sisters were to become sacred vessels, a living bridge between the realm of the dead and the world of the living. 13 souls, 13 steps, each death opening the veil a little further. But it didn't stop there. As Dr. Hartwell continued, a darker truth emerged. These were not mystical instructions, they were psychological ones. The letters outlined in disturbing detail The methodology of breaking down the human mind through faith, religious fervor, total isolation, repetition of spiritual language, the careful planting of dreams and visions, subtle manipulation of diet, sleep, and social dynamics, all of it designed to make the sisters believe that death was not death, but transcendence, a calling, a joy, the serenity on their faces, not rapture, conditioning. The shepherd had taken everything they believed, in everything they held sacred, and twisted it into a weapon. They hadn't been led to God. They'd been led to the edge of a cliff and taught to call the fall salvation. Worse still, Sacred Heart was not an isolated tragedy. This ritual has been attempted before one letter read, and will be again. The shepherd was orchestrating similar events in religious communities across the country. Wherever leaders could be convinced to see his mission as divine, he planted the seeds. Mass death disguised as holy purpose. Faith turned into a suicide note. Dr. Hartwell's hands trembled as he read the final pages. The shepherd had planned to visit Sacred Heart in the spring. He wanted to witness the culmination of his experiment firsthand. He had not seen the sisters as human beings. He saw them as data points, test subjects, proof that faith properly manipulated could override even the most basic instinct survival. He was building a system, Hartwell realized, a framework to trigger mass suicide by faith alone. The final entry in Sister Mary Agnes's journal confirmed it all. By the time Dr. Hartwell made his discoveries, it was already too late. She was sitting alone in the chapel, her record book open on her lap. Her handwriting was shaky, the lines uneven, torn between terror and anticipation. "They are all here with me now," she wrote. "I see them as clearly as I ever did in life. Maybe even more clearly. They do not ask me to come. They do not pressure me. They only wait, smiling, peaceful, certain. I think I will go to them now." That was the last thing she ever wrote. The convent at Sacred Heart was closed permanently in the spring of 1834. The building was later abandoned and over time reclaimed by the wilderness. The shepherd was never found. His letters, what remained of them, were sealed away by church authorities and buried in archives no one speaks of today. As for Dr. Hartwell, he left the medical profession shortly afterward. He died in isolation in 1841, having never published what he uncovered. But Sister Mary Agnes's journal survived. So did the truth. And now so do you. You've heard the story. The question is, will you ever stop hearing it? They stand in a circle around me, their faces aglow with a light that doesn't reflect it, emanates. Their voices blend into a harmony that doesn't belong in this world, and yet I ache to follow. Sister Mary Agnes could feel the veil thinning. They whispered to her, now gently, lovingly, telling her the bridge was nearly complete. All it required was one more soul, one more willing step, and she was the last. Meanwhile, in the cold silence of the convent's library, Dr. Hartwell had cracked the cipher in full. The mysterious figure known only as the Shepherd had a real name, Marcus Aldrich, a former seminary student expelled for heretical doctrines on death. Aldrich had not disappeared. he had refined his theories. He believed death was not an end, but a doorway. And if prepared correctly through what he called spiritual engineering, the soul could transcend and even return, not as ghosts, not as monsters, but as guides. He envisioned a spiritual bridge, one built with devotion, ritual, and willing sacrifice. And Sacred Heart was just one of his experiments. Aldrich does not believe in murder, Dr. Hartwell wrote. He believes in transformation through faith. And he manipulates the faithful to walk willingly into death, believing it to be sanctification. But the most terrifying revelation wasn't Aldrich's theology. It was his method. He didn't merely suggest ideas to the vulnerable. He created an entire framework of psychological programming designed to erode free will and implant fatal obedience. The letters were meticulous. They showed how Aldrich instructed Mother Superior Brennan to groom the sisters over months, introducing the idea that some are chosen for divine missions, reinforcing isolation as a form of holiness, using prayer and fasting not just for devotion, but for mental susceptibility, framing every death not as tragedy, but as a divine promotion. Do not mourn them, one letter instructed. Envy them. He had even weaponized the most sacred bond among the sisters, their love. Each death was made to look beautiful. Each smile, each folded hand, each whispered, soon made the others long to follow. Faith was no longer a shield. It had become the instrument of their undoing. Dr. Hartwell, sick with dread, raced to the chapel. He had to reach Sister Mary Agnes before the final step. He found her kneeling before the altar, arms outstretched as though she was already being held by unseen hands. Her eyes glistened with something not of this world. "They've shown me beauty, Doctor," she whispered. "A place where pain dissolves, where the weight we carry drops away like old clothes. How can I walk away from such mercy?" Dr. Hartwell knelt beside her, desperate. He told her everything. He read aloud the decoded letters, explained Aldrich's program of manipulation, how the visions, the songs, the sense of peace, it was manufactured, not mystical, not divine, designed. But Mary Agnes only smiled, the same familiar smile that had haunted every death. "You see only the surface," she said softly. "You see loss where there is gain. My sisters are not gone." She turned to look at the empty pews behind them, and for a fleeting moment, Dr. Hartwell saw her expression change, not in fear, not in doubt, but in reverence, as though she were in the company of saints, as though the chapel was no longer empty. This was not grief. This was not madness. It was conviction forged in isolation, wrapped in faith, and sharpened by a madman who understood the human spirit better than most ever dared. And Sister Mary Agnes was ready. If you thought the story had already reached its darkest point, prepare yourself. The final chapter awaits. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share with someone who isn't afraid of the truths hidden in history. Sleepy History Tales will return with the conclusion when the bridge is finally crossed. They are more alive than they have ever been, Sister Mary Agnes whispered, and soon I will join them in that greater life. Dr. Hartwell, frantic and trembling, made one last desperate attempt to stop her. He lunged forward, trying to pull her away from the altar, to sever the invisible thread drawing her into death. But she looked at him gently, her eyes shining with something beyond fear, and spoke one final word. Now, her body went limp in his arms. Her breathing ceased. And just like that, the last of the Sisters of Sacred Heart had crossed the threshold. No struggle, no signs of poison, violence, or disease. Only that same serene expression. A peace that had been crafted, not earned. Implanted, not granted. A product of careful manipulation. She had not died alone. She had been led to it, invited, and she had accepted. Dr. Hartwell remained in the convent for 3 days after Sister Mary Agnes's death, the lone soul in a place once alive with prayer. Now he cared for 14 bodies, and the terrible realization that these women had not been taken by God, but by man. By a man who understood faith like a surgeon, understands anatomy intimately, expertly, and cruelly. When the snow finally melted enough for him to return to Millbrook, Dr. Hartwell left Sacred Heart as a different man. He submitted a quiet, unassuming report to county officials. The deaths he claimed were the result of a mysterious illness, one contained by the convent's remoteness. No need for alarm, no cause for scandal. The church sealed the building. The bodies were buried in a single grave behind the chapel, beneath iron crosses and drifting snow. The matter officially was closed, but the truth was only beginning to surface. Years later, after Dr. Hartwell's own death in 1867, his private journals were discovered among his possessions. Inside were detailed accounts not only of the tragedy at Sacred Heart, but of a larger, darker pattern. In Virginia, a convent where 8 nuns died peacefully in their sleep. Each clutched a note called home. In Pennsylvania, 12 monks found dead in their chapel after what one terrified survivor called a night of divine visitation. In Tennessee, a Baptist mission where 23 members of the congregation died mid-prayer, their faces glowing with inexplicable bliss. Every incident explained away disease, exhaustion, grace, but Hartwell saw the common thread. Each death was tied to the same shadowy correspondence. Each case bore the imprint of Marcus Aldrich, the self-proclaimed shepherd. In obscure theological journals, Hartwell uncovered Aldrich's writings hidden under pseudonyms. He read of spiritual engineering, of faith as a mechanism, not a mystery. Aldrich didn't see death as failure. He saw it as ascension. He believed that if a community was properly isolated, primed with obedience, immersed in prayer and deprivation, and slowly fed the idea of transcendence, they would beg to die. In his journals, Aldrich described the deaths as demonstrations, proof that his methodology could bypass the most primal instinct humans possess, the will to live. True faith, Aldrich wrote, must include the willingness to shed the flesh. Only then does belief become transformation. He envisioned a future in which entire congregations would follow his doctrine, ushering in a new era of collective spiritual death as the ultimate act of devotion. He saw himself not as a killer, but as a prophet. Dr. Hartwell saw something else. He saw the shattered lives, the silenced voices, the weaponized grace. The Sisters of Sacred Heart hadn't died from supernatural forces. They died from faith distorted into something monstrous. They were not taken. They were led, and he had been too late to stop it. The final entry in his journal closes the chapter on Sacred Heart, but opens a darker one on faith itself. These women didn't die for God, he wrote. They died for a lie wrapped in scripture. And somewhere, Marcus Aldrich is still writing letters. If this story disturbed you as deeply as it did Dr. Hartwell, share it with someone who believes they've heard everything. The past isn't always buried, and neither are the dead. Sleepy History Tales returns soon, with more stories whispered through time, where faith, fear, and human frailty collide. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments what's the darkest piece of forgotten history you've ever heard. Dr. Hartwell's final discovery was the one that disturbed him most of all. Marcus Aldrich had not acted alone. Beneath the shepherd's mystique was a network, a quiet conspiracy of former seminary students, excommunicated clergy, and spiritually disillusioned followers who shared his vision. They were infiltrators, not killers in the traditional sense, but cultivators, sowers of psychological ruin. They embedded themselves within devout, isolated communities for months, sometimes years, gathering details about leadership theology, traditions, and weaknesses. And when the soil was ripe, Aldrich wrote his letters. What happened at Sacred Heart? Dr. Hartwell realized with dawning horror was not an isolated tragedy. It was just one test in a larger program. Aldrich was refining a process, streamlining the art of mass death, cloaked in religious transcendence. He wanted more than scattered successes. He wanted a demonstration. Hundreds, thousands, all believing their death was sacred, all led willingly into the dark. The Sisters of Sacred Heart, Dr. Hartwell wrote, were test subjects in a laboratory of faith, their lives reduced to data, their love for God hijacked for a madman's experiment. Aldrich himself was a ghost, a phantom slipping through jurisdictions, changing names, leaving behind only hollow rooms and devastated communities. The closest Hartwell ever got to him was in the summer of 1835. He arrived in a Pennsylvania town just 3 days too late. In the room Aldrich had vacated, there was nothing but a single page. The work continues, written in the same meticulous script that had filled the letters to Mother Superior Brennan. Some said he ran aware that investigators were closing in. Others believed he joined one of the very communities he had conditioned, willingly stepping into death, a martyr of his own design. But Hartwell believed something worse. He believed Aldrich had simply moved west to the new frontier, where faith was even more fervent and isolation even more complete. New hunting grounds. In his final journal entry, Dr. Hartwell wrote, "The true horror is not that one man could do this, but that the method is so perfect, so precisely attuned to human longing for purpose and transcendence, that it could be repeated by anyone." The Sacred Heart Convent was left abandoned for nearly 40 years. In 1873, it was demolished. The land sold to the Johnson family for farming. They never reported anything strange, except that their livestock refused to graze near the old convent grounds. The animals would approach, then turn away as if repelled by something invisible. The graveyard remains to this day. The wooden crosses that once marked the 14 sisters have rotted away. Only faint depressions in the earth remain. But people still whisper of strange things, lights flickering among the graves in the dead of winter, voices softly singing hymns in no known tongue, a deep aching sadness that settles over all who visit. Ghost stories, or just the power of suggestion, we can't say. But what's certain is this: the story of Sacred Heart is more than a ghost tale. It is a warning. After Dr. Hartwell's death in 1867, his case files were sent to the Ohio Historical Society. They sat unopened for decades. It wasn't until the 1970s and 80s, after Jonestown, Heaven's Gate, and Waco, that researchers began to connect the dots. Suddenly, what happened in 1835 didn't look like isolated madness. It looked like a blueprint. Modern psychologists call it coercive persuasion. Aldrich had unknowingly pioneered a textbook case of thought reform. Isolation, repetition, erosion of critical thinking, reframing death as salvation. He didn't attack their faith, said cult expert Dr. Margaret Chen. He weaponized it. The most terrifying part: these weren't unstable or wicked people. The Sisters of Sacred Heart were loving, devoted, sincere, and they were led to their deaths by someone who understood them better than they understood themselves. Their story is a solemn lesson that even the purest devotion can be exploited by evil in disguise, that the language of righteousness can hide the darkest intent, that true vigilance requires not just faith, but the wisdom to question those who lead in its name. The isolation the sisters cherished became their downfall. Had outsiders visited more frequently, had church authorities kept watch, had their world been less cut off, perhaps they'd still be alive. Let this story remind us: evil often wears a cross. It quotes scripture. It speaks softly and smiles peacefully. And when it comes, it doesn't always take lives by force. Sometimes it convinces us to give them willingly. What do you think? Were the Sisters of Sacred Heart simply victims of psychological manipulation? Or did something genuinely supernatural happen in that chapel? Could a tragedy like this happen again in our modern age? Or have we learned enough to recognize the warning signs? Tell us in the comments below. And if you found this story chilling, share it with someone who believes that history has no more secrets left to tell, because we've only just begun. Subscribe to Sleepy History Tales for more true stories from the darkest corners of America's spiritual past. The next mystery is waiting, and it's closer than you think.